Hello again, YouTube. So it's the 9th of April, 2019, and in this video I'm going to be discussing some of the controversy that's unfolded recently where, as I call her, Tanky Tulsi Gabbard went on the Young Turks network and was interviewed, but she refused to allow Ana Kasparian, one of the top co-hosts on TYT, to interview her, because Ana Kasparian has actually been very critical of Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy. I find this funny because I'm critical of Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy. I'm somewhere between a liberal hawk and a neoconservative, and so that's why I call her Tanky Tulsi Gabbard, because she props up and does apologia for dictators, and whereas in Ana Kasparian's case, she's critical of Tulsi Gabbard because she sees Tulsi Gabbard as actually being too much of a hawk. Oh my god, no, I mean, I try to keep it together in these videos. I try to present a professional sort of demeanor out of respect to the viewers of this channel, right? But, I mean, it's just so funny. It's just so funny because, of course, Tulsi Gabbard is anything but a hawk. She's about as least hawk-like of any candidate for presidential office that I've ever seen or read about. I mean, this is like her level of dictator apologia and isolationism is on a similar level to the America Firsters back in the run-up to World War II. I mean, it's basically, the Wilsonian ideals, the Truman containment ideals, the Truman Doctrine, the Reagan Doctrine, the idea of the United States as the bastion of liberty and the guardian of freedom, and ultimately the vanguard of human rights in the world, the whole idea of the United States as the preeminent world power that fights for justice in the world, the whole idea of the responsibility to protect, all out the window. She's about as Westphalian sovereignty as it gets, except she believes that the United States is right to pursue the war on terrorism, because the war on terrorism was basically an attack on the... It was started with an attack on the United States. So isolationists, even the most radical isolationists, even the Ron Paul types, they still support retaliation if you attack the United States. So this whole idea that, well, no, actually, Tulsi Gabbard's not an isolationist because she wants to wage the war on terror. That doesn't make her not an isolationist. Al-Qaeda attacked the United States of America. So that's just, like, I don't agree with isolationists, but isolationists still think that the U.S. has a right to defend itself. They just believe in the Westphalianism and all that. So in her case, so she is an isolationist. But in Ana Kasparian's worldview, and I say this, I'm not totally opposed to Ana Kasparian here. I agree with her on a lot of social issues. I like a lot of her videos, like when she calls out people, grotesque misogynists, like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro. I call him petulant child, Ben Shapiro. She goes after and dunks on Dave Rubin, who's basically, he does apologia for fascists like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and lots of authoritarian strongmen basically, and then claims to be a capitalist and claims to believe in quote-unquote classical liberalism. Classical liberalism, Adam Smith, Milton Friedman, they were actually against nationalizing industries, which is one of the things that Jair Bolsonaro ran on. Bolsonaro ran a populist national socialist campaign, basically, that, he's going to root out all of the homosexuals and he's going to nationalize the industries. And so, sure, he's got one of the Chicago boys in his government right now. Does that guy not get a bullet in his head in the next few years? We'll see. Because that's how these dictatorships tend to go. And for a gay man like Dave Rubin to embrace Bolsonaro, I believe he embraced Bolsonaro because Bolsonaro had a policy where he was going to go after feminism in schools or something. Some inconsequential wedge issue type thing. And so Ruben, the classic bootlicker, So I agree with Ana Kasparian on a lot of these issues and her perspective on a lot of these figures. But the perspective of Tulsi Gabbard, her perspective on Tulsi Gabbard, I just find fascinating how, and she's had a staunch disagreement with others at TYT over this. There's a bit of a disagreement with Cenk Uygur. So Cenk Uygur called he referred to Tanky Tulsi as a progressive, basically. Of course, he doesn't call her Tanky Tulsi. He called her Tulsi Gabbard. Anna shuts in and says, well, no, she's not progressive. She's not progressive because she's for waging the war on terror. But here's the problem with that. One, I don't think she's a progressive. I don't think there's anything progressive about going over and meeting Assad and saying that we should even negotiate with Assad. I don't see anything progressive there because he has no legitimacy to govern. He gassed his own people. And even if you believe in the conspiracy theory that was a false flag, he still killed 500,000 Syrians and has been torturing them for decades so that he can hold on to his swag yacht and his swag mansion and his swag Benz. There's nothing progressive about that. Let's just get that clear. So Ana Kasparian was right, technically, when she said that Tulsi Gabbard is not a progressive. That's correct. But she didn't mean it in that sense. She meant that Tulsi Gabbard was too hawkish. But again, I see Tulsi Gabbard as one of the most egregious isolationists in modern memory, in American politics at least, right? But in Ana Kasparian's worldview, she comes at this from such a, I guess it's a pacifist way of looking at the world, though it could be argued that being against retaliation isn't even a pacifist way of thinking, because if that's your doctrine, it actually welcomes war. It welcomes other countries to attack you if you say you won't fight back. So, like, even pacifists, a lot of pacifists will argue, well, of course, if you attack America, that America has a right to respond. They just have a problem with quote-unquote preemptive wars or proactive foreign policy. They have a problem with neoconservatism. That is a logical disagreement on their end in terms of consistency. I disagree with it, of course. But it is something where if you are opposed to, say, interventionism, yes, you can still be in support of retaliating if Al-Qaeda attacks America. So for Ana Kasparian to attack Tulsi Gabbard on arguably the only issue of agreement that I know of that I have an agreement with Tulsi Gabbard, because Tulsi Gabbard has a fairly conservative background, and I'm dubious about her sudden enlightenment or whatever, so to speak. I'm very dubious about that. I think she's going to court reactionary conservative voters if she gets a nomination. Like, let's just say that she wins this, right? And she gets the Democratic nomination for president. I don't think she will. Mind you, I don't think she will. But if she does, let's just say for the sake of argument, who do we think that she's going to court in terms of reaching out to try to get voters to vote against Trump? She's going to go to the bottom of the barrel, the 4chan boys, the alt-righters, the people with the posters of Bashar Assad on their wall who retweet anti-feminist stuff and follow Sargon of Akkad. She's going to go to the least progressive people in the world and say to them, hey, look, I'm chill with your dictators. Now, she might not say it in that way, but she'll say something like, we need to be friends with Putin. The West has a lot of problems. We need to make peace with all of these dictators. That's what she'll say. And they will make an unholy alliance with her. And so she's an anti-progressive person. She's a reactionary person. She is an dictator apologist and an isolationist. But she happens to at least have the decency enough to say, well, yeah, if you do terrorism on us, we get to fight back. That's like the most, that's such a low bar. That's like the first assumption of anything. Like, I honestly, when I'm debating isolationists, I assume that we both just, without even asking, that we both agree that, well, if somebody attacks the country, we have a right to respond. That, to me, that's just a basal assumption I didn't even think of that needed to be clarified. But apparently in Ana Kasparian's world, you don't have a right to fight back if somebody attacks you. So this leads me to the question, well, how can you think like that? I mean, if Ana Kasparian ever happens to watch this video, my question to her would be, look, I agree with you on a lot of social issues. I think you're right to call out all these charlatans on the right and call them, scummy and stand up for yourself when they attack you and everything without justified reason, without citing specific statements, when they just attack your personality. What I'm doing here is just taking a very specific statement about how you, Ana Kasparian, had said that Tulsi Gabbard wasn't progressive because she is a hawk on the war on terror, which I would argue her position isn't even necessarily a hawkish position. She calls it. Tulsi Gabbard calls it hawkish on the war on terror. I argue that that's just defending yourself. That hawkism is usually seen as a proactive or preemptive action, whereas what Tulsi Gabbard wants to do is just retaliate for things like 9/11 and other terrorist attacks that have happened in America. That's a totally reasonable position. So I made a video the other day where I very much criticized Tulsi Gabbard. And of course, quite a few people downvoted me. Of course, I kind of take those as a badge of honor. If people the kind of people that like Tulsi Gabbard downvote me, that means that I must be doing something right. Personally, that's kind of how I see it. Of course, I'm totally open to criticism. And, if you downvote me and you think that there's areas where I can improve, I welcome that criticism 100%. I'm just getting started on YouTube, right? But when it comes to this area, now I'm in agreement. I have an area of agreement with Tulsi Gabbard. And so when it comes to the issue of defending her from Ana Kasparian, now the area where I'm going to actually defend Ana Kasparian on, though, which is interesting, I'm going to defend Ana Kasparian because Ana Kasparian said that, well, if Tulsi Gabbard goes on the network and she's one of the co-hosts that gets the chance to interview people, for Tulsi Gabbard to say, well, I'm going to go on your network, but X person can't interview me, that's a weak move. Come on. So for example, if I go on Fox News, right, but I say only Shep Smith can interview me because I agree with him, but on some issues, but Tucker Carlson can interview me because I disagree with him on social issues and economics and foreign policy. I disagree with Tucker Carlson on almost everything at this point, right? All the big three spheres of politics. He's a social conservative. I'm a social liberal. He's a populist that flirts with socialism and fascism. I'm a liberal capitalist. And then he is an isolationist, and I'm a neoconservative / liberal hawk. So we're from opposite ends of the political world, basically. But if I go on Fox News, I don't get to agree to go on Fox and then tell them, oh, but Tucker Carlson can't interview me. Actually, I'd probably have the most interesting interview if Tucker Carlson interviewed me, you know what I'm saying? So for Tulsi Gabbard to say, okay, but Ana Kasparian can interview me, it just shows a profound weakness on her part. But I'm defending Tulsi Gabbard on the actual substance of her issue, because on the war on terrorism, she's in the right on the war on terrorism. That's my only foreign policy area of agreement with her, is that the United States and the West has a right to carry out and prosecute the war on terror if attacked first, right? Now I go further. I say, we should do preemptive things to curtail terrorism and to take out terrorist home bases and state sponsors of terrorism, to nip the problems in the bud before things like 9/11 happen. But it's a reasonable position, especially for somebody as isolationist as Tulsi Gabbard, to at least have that middle ground where she says, yes, but we get to, we get to fight back if terrorists attack us. That even if you are a pacifist, like I said, if you tell people you're not going to fight back, that welcomes war. That doesn't prevent war. That actually makes war more likely. So in Tulsi Gabbard's case, she's right on the issue, but she's wrong on the method. And Ana Kasparian is wrong on the issue, but she's right that if you come on the network, I mean, come on, you should expect tough questions. You should expect to not just have softballs thrown at you. You should expect to have people there that might have some questions for you that you might be uncomfortable answering. And I feel that Tulsi Gabbard's performance on Colbert made her realize that she expected lighter questions from a comedian. He asked some tough questions. You can check out my video on that, right? He asked her some tough questions that she was not prepared to answer, and it made her look very, very, very morally duplicitous. And it kind of exposed her isolationism for what it is. Moral relativistic, human rights for whites, to hell with everybody else. She admitted that Assad gassed his own people and then said, yeah, but we shouldn't do anything about it. And then went on to say it's fine if Russia and China become the quote-unquote police of the world. In other words, the U.S. shouldn't be the police of the world to help protesters around the world. We should let China and Russia do it so that they can crack down on protesters and uphold their dictator client states. So this is Tulsi Gabbard. I don't agree with her on very much, right? But I think that she got shocked when she went on Colbert and said, I can't let this happen again. It's going to take my campaign. So she saw a liberal hawk in Stephen Colbert question her hard. Now you have a very, 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 very isolationist. It's almost an insult to some isolationists, because some isolationists, actually probably most isolationists, still believe in the right to retaliation if attacked first. I'm sure Ron Paul believes in that. Like, I disagree with him on everything in foreign policy, basically, but I'm sure we would agree on that, right? I'm sure he believes that America has the right to retaliate, right? If America's attacked. I'm sure he wouldn't just say, oh, Canada invaded the States, let's just hand them everything. I'm sure, I'm positive, and that's a guy who's about as isolation as it gets, but somehow Ana Kasparian manages to outdo Ron Paul in that respect. That's funny. That's really funny to me. And of course, she calls herself a progressive and actually has some fairly progressive social issues. But of course, they're relegated to the West. If you happen to be mostly brown, not white, live in a dictatorship, well, the hell with you. We're not going to do anything about it. I wouldn't call that progressive at all. But so I just want to put my thoughts out there on this. I found it funny. I mean, I really don't have like a definite, who's right, who's wrong here sort of thing. Tulsi Gabbard is right on the substance on this specific issue, but Ana Kasparian is right that she should be able to interview her if she's going to agree to go on the network in the first place. Because I mean, that just isn't so integrity. If you go on the network, but then you say, oh, but only these people can interview me, that's not fair. That's just not how a democracy should operate. That's anti-open society. That's just, either just don't go on the network at all. Just say, hey, look, I'm not going to go on Fox. I'm not going to go on TYT because I don't want to face hard questions. But you don't get to then go on the network, but then say, oh, but X people can't interview me. It's like, well, I mean, but at that point, it just looks so weak on her part. So, of course, I'm ultimately glad about this from the standpoint of my worldview, because I think that it's going to hurt Tulsi Gabbard in her chances of winning. But in a way, she was kind of in a way put in a bad position whether she accepted Anna's interview or not, because if she accepted her interview, that her side they would tear up each other. You'd have the pro-Bernie Anna supporters and then the pro-Tulsi supporters basically destroying each other, where her base would get smaller and smaller and more divisive. They would cannibalize each other, basically, because they do have a lot of overlap on foreign policy. It wouldn't have worked out very well for her. But now, because she doesn't do it, it doesn't look very well for her, because she'll maintain her loyal fan base, but she's not going to convince other people that might support other candidates that largely agree with her, like, say, Andrew Yang or Bernie Sanders. She's going to look like somebody who's afraid to answer questions, which, I mean, let's keep it real. She's afraid to answer questions because Stephen Colbert asks really tough questions. And, I pointed that out in my video a couple days ago. It took me a while to make because I just started the YouTube channel, right? I wasn't doing these things. I wasn't doing YouTube back then. I'm doing YouTube now, though. It's April 2019. I'm on this. I'm going to be here offering analysis to people from, the socially liberal, economically liberal, and liberal hawk perspective, because it is definitely needed these days with how much the isolationists have overtaken the political spectrum on both sides. Of course, you got your paleo conservatives, you got your the OG isolationists. They've been isolationists since, when Ron Paul was in kindergarten. They were isolationists saying, Hitler's our friend. We should leave Europe to their own business. Hitler can kill how many Jews he wants. That's his business. Hashtag Westphalia fetish. But now you got the left too. That's come around. Totally isolationist, right? So, and Ana Kasparian. I guess there's a new category. I don't even know what to call her foreign policy at this point, because I'm inclined to call her an isolationist, and I want to know what you guys think about this, and hopefully she can answer at some point. But what do you call somebody who is so anti-national security, I guess, where they don't even believe in the right for a country to retaliate if attacked? Because, don't get me wrong, I have insults against isolationists. I go after them, I'm going to be going after them all the time with this channel. But I want to at least fairly represent, their core ideology. Show me an isolationist, besides Ana Kasparian, who believes that America shouldn't fight back if attacked first. So I want to know what's a good name to call somebody, because pacifist seems like a dumb name, because I know pacifists that I disagree with totally on foreign policy, but they still believe, well, okay, you can only do war if you're attacked first. I know, like, libertarians, I disagree with them foreign policy and other issues, but they believe in the non-aggression principle where, but if you're attacked first, you get to defend yourself. They believe in the idea of self-defense. I thought that everybody, no matter how far to the isolationist side of the spectrum, believed in the right to self-defense and the right that, okay, wars, I'm against war, but in less self-attack. That's usually stated as a caveat. I'm just trying to think of, like, what's a label, what's a term, what's the ideology that describes somebody who is openly for never doing anything even if attacked. Because, I guess pacifism, it could be a strand of pacifism, but again, it feels like that would be inspiring war, because all the other countries would say, oh, they are not going to retaliate, and they have no deterrence anymore. Let's attack them. So it doesn't seem like it would be pro-peace. It seems like, logically speaking, from a game theory standpoint, there's nothing pacifistic about that. Because even the most pacifistic people still argue that, hey, like, if you come after us, right, well, of course we get to go after you. The only question is whether we get to do it first, or whether we should be intervening in other countries', Westphalian sovereignty concept and whatnot. If we should be doing the responsibility to protect, humanitarian intervention, preemptive wars, strategic strikes to take out, say, like a nuclear reactor or something, but not do a full-scale war. All these are debatable issues. But I thought that everybody from the isolationists to the most neoconservatives, they all agreed on the idea, at least, that we get to defend ourselves if attacked first. To see Ana Kasparian basically come out and have a problem with Tulsi Gabbard for wanting to prosecute and wage the war on terrorism. That was goofy. And I generally find myself in a lot of agreement with the Young Turks. I felt like it took Cenk Uygur aback. I'm sure it took probably some other people at the network aback. Shocked me. I was watching that. I lolled. Right? I lolled. I was like, what? That's the funniest thing I've heard all week. I was like, I watch a lot of comedy. I watch a lot of, I browse a lot of meme forums. I enjoy a good laugh. That was one of the funniest moments I had heard all week. It was a caricature. And the reason why it's funny is that I know that she wasn't being ironic about it, right? It wasn't a shtick. I know that she actually believes that if they bomb the World Trade Centers, we shouldn't do anything. Maybe we had it coming. Like, maybe that's the argument. I don't know anything other than to call it anti-American in the literal sense of the word. I know that conservatives and liberals both call each other anti-American over things all the time. Like, oh, you burn your Gillette razors, that's anti-American. Like, I'm against those people, but I think they have the right to, burn their Nike shoes or their Gillette razors or whatever. It's a free country. But in Ana Kasparian's case, like, if you say Al-Qaeda can attack us, basically, is her argument, and we shouldn't prosecute retaliatory action against them. Well, to me, that seems like it's the definition of anti-Americanism. It just seems that it comes from a point of an ideology where if something bad happens to America, if somebody attacks America, well, it must have been our fault. It just seems like blaming the victim, basically. You're blaming America even though America's the victim of terrorist attacks. The 3,000 people that died on 9/11, well, they must have had it coming. Bin Laden must have been right to be mad at America. Al-Qaeda must be right to be upset at America. It places the default perspective from the perpetrator as the one who started it to America started it by existing. And so everything would just be better if America wasn't around. I don't know what to call that other than anti-Americanism. And I know that Ana Kasparian isn't entirely anti-American because a lot of the values that she espouses are very American liberal values. It's just so goofy, and it makes the progressive movement altogether just look like such a joke, And so this is my perspective on it. I want to know your guys' thoughts. I want to see what the YouTube community has to say about this. Like, mainly what I'm curious about is what percentage of people here kind of take Tulsi Gabbard's side in this and say, well, she had the right to not have Ana Kasparian interview her, versus the people who take Ana Kasparian's side on this and say, well, Ana Kasparian had the right to interview her. Because there's two layers. There's that dynamic, but there's also the who's right on the issues. I argue on this one specific issue, Tulsi Gabbard is actually right. I mean, it sounds funny to say. Everything about this story is actually really funny, except it has real grave consequences in terms of the war on terrorism and whether or not we're going to be attacked again or if we're going to prosecute retaliatory strikes for those attacks. And in terms of deterrence and in terms of signaling, it has real world consequences. But in a microcosm, this is one of the funniest things I've seen in a while. So thanks for watching, guys, and let me know what you think.